The gray, unforgiving sky had become a permanent fixture in Thomas's world, a flat, oppressive ceiling that mirrored the emptiness inside him. 7 months, 213 days. Each one began and ended in the same house, a place that was once a home but had since become a museum of loss. Every object, every patch of sunlight on the floor, was an artifact from a time before the silence. The silence was the worst part. It had seeped into the walls, into the very fabric of the furniture, a constant, humming reminder of the voice that was supposed to fill it. Lily's room remained untouched. He had locked the door on the second day and had not found the strength to open it since. He knew what was in there. The bed with its unicorn-themed duvet, the menagerie of stuffed animals arranged on the shelves, the half-finished drawing of a family portrait, him, her, and their cat Marmalade, on her small wooden desk. And the window that stared out over the manicured lawn of their quiet, suburban street. It was from that window, police said, that she had vanished. No broken glass, no damaged latch, no footprints in the soft flower bed below. Just an open window and an empty bed. A ghost slipping out into the night. The investigation had been a brief, frantic storm that quickly calmed into a stagnant pool of dead ends. Flyers with her smiling face, a gap-toothed grin from her last school picture, had faded on telephone poles and in grocery store windows, their corners curling and stained by rain. The initial surge of neighborhood concern had receded into awkward, pitying glances when he collected his mail. Detective Miller, a man with tired eyes and a voice worn smooth by delivering bad news, still called once a week, but the calls had become a formality, a ritual of reassurance that reassured no one. The case was cold, a file in a cabinet, a name on a list of heartbreaking statistics. But for Thomas, it was never cold. It was a fire that burned behind his eyes, fueled by sleepless nights and a ceaseless, looping reel of questions. He replayed the last day constantly. The breakfast they shared, her chattering about a field trip. The way he had kissed her forehead before she ran for the school bus. The silly argument they'd had over dessert. He had insisted on one cookie. She had wanted two. It was the last conversation he ever had with his daughter, and it was about a cookie. The triviality of it was a special kind of torture. He had tried to clean. Cleaning felt like an action, a forward motion in a life that had ground to a halt. He started with the garage, a space cluttered with forgotten hobbies and the detritus of a life lived. Then he moved to the hall closet, a cramped space filled with winter coats and board games they never played. It was there, tucked away on the top shelf behind a stack of old blankets, that he found it. Lily's old digital camera. It was a cheap, bright pink thing he had bought her for her 8th birthday 2 years ago. She had been obsessed with it for a month, documenting everything. The cat sleeping, her own feet, close-up shots of her lunch, before it was forgotten in favor of a newer gadget. He sat on the floor of the hallway, the scent of mothballs thick in the air. He clicked the power button. The small screen flickered to life, showing a low battery warning. He scrolled through the photos, a slideshow of a life that felt a century away. There was Marmalade, a blur of orange fur. A selfie of Lily with her tongue sticking out, her eyes wide and mischievous. A dozen photos of her toys, arranged in strange, dramatic poses. He smiled, a brittle, unfamiliar feeling. It felt like archaeology, unearthing relics of a lost civilization. He kept scrolling, his thumb moving automatically. Photo after photo of mundane, childish things. Then the images changed. They became furtive, strange. The next 5 photos were all taken from her bedroom window. They were blurry, shot at maximum zoom, the digital pixels struggling to render a coherent image. They were all of the same thing, his neighbor's backyard. Specifically, a patch of ground near the base of the ancient oak tree that straddled their property line. Thomas frowned, leaning closer to the tiny screen. Why would she take these? The first photo was just a wide shot of the yard. The next was zoomed in on that one spot. The earth looked dark, disturbed, a raw patch in the otherwise perfect green lawn of his neighbor, Mr. Henderson. The third and fourth photos were of the same spot, taken from a slightly different angle, as if she were trying to get a better view. The final picture was the strangest. It was taken at dusk, the light failing. In the corner of the frame, a shape was just barely visible. A shovel leaning against the tree. He checked the date stamp. The photos were taken 3 days before she disappeared. A cold knot formed in his stomach. It wasn't just a random picture. It was documentation. She had seen something. His gaze lifted from the camera and drifted down the hall, toward the locked door of her room. The silence in the house suddenly felt different. It was no longer just empty. It felt charged, heavy with a question he had never thought to ask. The digital camera became a malevolent artifact, a small pink oracle he could neither consult further nor ignore. Thomas spent the next 2 days in a state of suspended animation, moving between his own window and Lily's locked door. From his study, he could see Mr. Henderson's yard clearly. The patch of earth Lily had photographed was now covered with lush, green grass, indistinguishable from the rest of the lawn. It was perfect, too perfect, like a scar that had been expertly concealed with makeup. Mr. Henderson himself was a fixture of the neighborhood, a man who seemed to have been old for decades. He was a widower, quiet and meticulous, known for his prize-winning roses and the unnerving precision with which he trimmed his hedges. In the frantic early days of the search, he had been questioned, like everyone on the block. He had been polite, cooperative, and had offered a simple, verifiable alibi. He had been visiting his sister in Oregon. The police had confirmed it. He was just a sad, lonely old man, harmless. But Lily's photos had planted a seed of doubt, a venomous vine that was now wrapping itself around Thomas's thoughts. Why would she, a girl afraid of spiders and the dark, spend her time documenting her neighbor's gardening? It didn't make sense, unless what she saw had frightened her. Unless the disturbed earth was not the result of planting petunias. He remembered her being quieter in those last few days. He had chalked it up to a squabble with a friend at school, the fleeting dramas of childhood. Now he saw it as a shadow falling over her. He knew he had to do something. The camera felt hot in his hand, a piece of evidence that could mean everything or nothing. He called Detective Miller. He heard the weariness in the detective's voice before he even finished his first sentence. Thomas explained what he had found, his own voice tight with a mixture of hope and fear. A camera? With pictures of his yard. Miller's sigh was audible over the line. Thomas, kids take pictures of weird things all the time. My own son has about 100 photos of the floor. It's probably nothing. But the ground was dug up, and there was a shovel. Thomas insisted, feeling the familiar frustration of being dismissed as a grieving, irrational parent. And it was right before. I understand. And I appreciate you calling, Miller said, his tone shifting into the practiced, placating cadence Thomas had come to despise. I'll make a note of it in the file, I promise. We'll keep it in mind. Keep it in mind. The 3 most useless words in the English language. It meant the camera would join the pile of cold leads and vague theories. It meant nothing would happen. Thomas hung up the phone feeling more alone than ever. The hope that had flickered within him was extinguished, leaving behind a cold, hard anger. If the police would not see, he would have to make them. His next call was to Sarah. They had divorced 3 years ago. The slow erosion of their marriage finalized long before Lily's disappearance. But the tragedy had forged a new, fragile bond between them, a partnership in grief. She listened patiently as he told her about the camera, about the photos, about his burgeoning suspicion of Mr. Henderson. Her silence on the other end of the line was heavy. "Oh, Tom," she finally said, and her voice was filled with a deep, aching sadness that was all for him. "Please don't do this to yourself." "Do what? Look for my daughter?" He shot back, his tone sharper than he intended. "No. Grasp at straws. Torture yourself with maybes," she said gently. "Mr. Henderson is just an old man. The police checked his alibi. He was 1,000 miles away. You're spinning theories because the not knowing is unbearable. I get it. I feel it too. But this isn't healthy. You're fixating on him because he's there. It's easier than staring into the void." Every word was a blow, because he knew she was saying them out of love, out of a genuine fear for his sanity. And a part of him knew she might be right, but the image of that disturbed earth was burned into his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that Lily had been trying to tell him something, that she had left him a final, cryptic message. "She was smart, Sarah," he said, his voice quiet now. "She wouldn't have taken those pictures for no reason." "She was a child, Tom," Sarah replied, her voice breaking slightly. "And she's gone. Please let the police do their job. Don't go down this rabbit hole. I can't bear to watch you destroy yourself." They ended the call with the chasm between them wider than ever. He was truly on his own. The police thought he was delusional. His ex-wife thought he was losing his mind. Maybe he was. But as he looked out the window at the neighbor's house, at the placid facade of green grass and blooming roses, he felt a certainty settle in his bones. Sarah was wrong. He was not staring into the void. He was staring at a monster who was hiding in plain sight. The skepticism from Miller and the pleading from Sarah did not deter Thomas. They galvanized him. Their doubts acted as a whetstone, sharpening his resolve into a fine, dangerous point. He was a man with nothing left to lose, which made him fearless. He began to watch Mr. Henderson with a singular, obsessive focus. He learned the man's rhythms, the quiet cadence of his retired life. Mr. Henderson's routine was a testament to precision. At 7:30 every morning, he would retrieve his newspaper from the driveway. At 10, he would tend to his garden for exactly 1 hour. Lunch was at noon. At 2, he would drive his immaculate, decade-old sedan to the grocery store or the library. He returned at 4. His curtains were drawn at 8 o'clock sharp. It was a life lived by the clock, so predictable it felt like a performance, a carefully constructed alibi for every minute of every day. Thomas's own life became a mirror image of Henderson's, his own routine dictated by the man's movements. He would sit in his study, the digital camera on the desk beside him, and watch. He cataloged every deviation, every minor change. A trip to the hardware store, an extra 10 minutes spent weeding the rose bushes. These were clues, he told himself, though he did not know what they pointed to. After a week of this silent, one-sided surveillance, the inaction became unbearable. He had to get closer. He needed to hear the man's voice, to look in his eyes when he talked about his perfect lawn. An excuse. He needed an excuse. His eyes landed on a cookbook on the kitchen counter. À pied. It was a classic, neighborly gesture. So normal it was absurd. He spent the afternoon baking. The domesticity of the act felt alien. Measuring flour and rolling out dough were motions from another life. The apple pie he pulled from the oven looked surprisingly perfect, a golden brown shield for his true intentions. He let it cool, then placed it in a carrier and walked the 50 feet across his lawn to Henderson's front door. Each step was a battle against the screaming voice in his head that told him this was insane, that Sarah was right. He rang the doorbell. The chime was a cheerful, melodic sound that was utterly at odds with the dread coiling in his gut. After a moment, the door opened. Mr. Henderson stood there, a tall, slightly stooped man with pale blue eyes and a cloud of perfectly white hair. He looked exactly as he always did, like someone's kindly grandfather. "Thomas," he said, his voice soft, a little reedy. He showed no surprise, only a mild, placid curiosity. "What can I do for you?" I baked a pie," Thomas said, holding it out. The words felt foolish on his tongue. "I made too much. Thought you might like some." A slow smile spread across Henderson's face. It was a practiced, gentle smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Why, that's awfully kind of you. Please come in. Let me get you a plate for you to take back." The inside of the house was like the man himself, impeccably clean, orderly, and strangely impersonal. The furniture was old but well kept. There were no family photos on the mantelpiece, no clutter on the coffee tables. It was less like a home and more like a showroom, a space designed to be looked at, not lived in. The air was cool and smelled faintly of lemon polish and something else, something metallic and vaguely unpleasant that tickled the back of his throat. Henderson led him to the kitchen. As he bustled about, finding a plate and a knife, Thomas steered the conversation. Your yard is looking incredible this year, Mr. Henderson, especially that patch by the oak tree. I had some trouble with my own lawn there. Roots, you know. Henderson paused, his back to Thomas. For a split second, his shoulders tensed. It was an almost imperceptible movement, but in his heightened state, Thomas saw it as clearly as a flare in the night. When he turned back around, the placid smile was firmly in place. Ah yes, a bit of a headache, that spot, he said, his tone breezy. He began slicing the pie with steady hands. Had a nasty plumbing leak last summer. Had to have the whole pipe dug up and replaced. Terrible mess. But the grass grew back thicker than ever, thankfully. Plumbing leak. The explanation was plausible. It was reasonable. And Thomas knew, with an instinct that transcended logic, that it was a complete and utter lie. He could feel the falsehood in the air, thick and cloying like the strange smell in the house. That must have been a lot of work, Thomas pressed, watching the man's face for any crack in the facade. It certainly was, Henderson said, placing a slice of pie on a saucer. He handed Thomas his now empty pie carrier. Well, I won't keep you. Thank you again for this. It was very thoughtful. He was being dismissed. The conversation was over. As Thomas stood in the doorway, Henderson offered him one last smile. You and your wife, you've been in my prayers since the news about your little girl. Terrible tragedy. Simply terrible. The mention of Lily from this man's lips was obscene. Felt like a violation. Thomas could only nod, his throat too tight to form words. He walked back to his own house, the empty pie dish feeling impossibly heavy in his hands. He had his answer. Henderson was lying. And the quiet, polite, harmless old man next door was the most dangerous person he had ever met. The lie about the plumbing echoed in Thomas's mind, a discordant note in the symphony of his obsession. A plausible lie was more damning than an obvious one. It was crafted, considered. It was a wall built to hide something. Thomas now had a purpose, to tear that wall down brick by brick. His first stop was the city planning department's online portal. It was a clunky, outdated website, but after an hour of navigating its arcane menus, he found what he was looking for. A searchable database of all permits issued in their municipality for the last 5 years. He typed in Mr. Henderson's address and ran a search for plumbing permits. The screen blinked, then returned a simple, definitive message. No records found. A cold, electric thrill shot through him. It was the first concrete piece of evidence he had, the first verifiable crack in Henderson's story. The lie wasn't just a feeling in his gut anymore. It was a fact. The disturbed earth was not from a burst pipe. His mind raced. If Henderson had lied about the yard, what else had he lied about? The alibi. The trip to Oregon to see his sister. It had been the cornerstone of his innocence. The reason the police had so quickly dismissed him. Thomas sat at his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He didn't know the sister's name, but he knew Henderson's, and he knew the state. He started with simple searches. Henderson, Oregon, obituary. The internet was a vast, chaotic archive of human lives. He waded through pages of results for other Hendersons, a sea of strangers. He refined his search, adding keywords like Portland, the city Miller had mentioned. And then he found it, an obituary from a Portland newspaper, dated 2 years ago. Eleanor Henderson Albright, beloved sister of Robert Henderson. Robert, Mr. Henderson. Thomas read the brief, sterile paragraph again and again. Eleanor had passed away peacefully after a long illness. She was survived by her brother, Robert. 2 years ago, the alibi was not just a lie. It was a ghost. Henderson had claimed to be visiting a woman who was already in her grave. The pieces were slotting into place, forming a picture of breathtaking deception. The photos, the lie about the plumbing, the fabricated alibi. This wasn't a grieving father's fantasy. This was real. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and vindication. He had been right. Everyone had been wrong. He grabbed the phone and dialed Detective Miller's number. his hand shaking so badly he misdialed twice. When Miller answered, his voice thick with its usual fatigue, Thomas didn't give him a chance to speak. The words tumbled out of him, sharp and precise, not with the rambling desperation of his previous calls, but with the cold clarity of fact. "It was a lie," Thomas said, his voice low and intense. "Henderson's alibi. His sister, Eleanor, died 2 years ago. I have the obituary. He lied about the plumbing in his yard, too. There's no permit on file with the city. He lied about everything, Miller. Everything." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. For the first time, Thomas did not hear dismissal or placation in the quiet. He heard the sound of a professional mind recalibrating, of puzzle pieces being forced into a new, horrific configuration. "Where did you find this?" Miller finally asked, his voice stripped of all its previous weariness. It was the voice of a cop now. "The city website. An online search," Thomas said. "It's all there. He was here, Miller. He was here when Lily disappeared." "Okay," Miller said, the single word carrying immense weight. "Okay, Thomas. I need you to do something for me. I need you to stay in your house. Do not talk to him. Do not go near his property. Do you understand me? Let us handle it from here." The validation was a dizzying relief, but it was quickly replaced by a new, urgent fear. Henderson was no longer just a suspicion. He was a cornered animal. Thomas agreed, promising to stay put. But as he hung up the phone, he knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. The game had changed, and he had no idea what Henderson's next move would be. Sleep was an impossibility. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves outside his window, was amplified into a threat. Thomas sat in the dark of his study, the chair pulled up to the glass, his eyes fixed on the silent, dark house across the lawn. He was a sentry, guarding a border that had already been breached 7 months ago. The police were taking it seriously now, but the bureaucratic wheels turned slowly. Warrants needed to be written, judges needed to be found. Time was stretching, thinning, and his nerves were frayed raw. Hours passed. The digital clock on his desk flipped past midnight, then 1, then 2. The street was a river of black, broken only by the pale, lonely islands of the streetlights. And then he saw it. A light flicked on in Henderson's kitchen. A moment later, the back door opened, spilling a pale yellow rectangle onto the lawn. Henderson emerged. He was dressed in dark work clothes, and in his hand he held a shovel. Thomas's blood ran cold. He watched, frozen, as the old man moved with a slow, deliberate purpose across the grass, his destination unmistakable, the patch of ground near the great oak tree. He set the shovel down and returned to the house, reappearing a moment later with a large, heavy-duty black plastic bag. It looked heavy. He dragged it toward the tree. This was it, the point of no return. Whatever was in that bag, whatever was under that ground, Henderson was moving it, destroying evidence, erasing the last trace of the truth. Miller's warning to stay away evaporated in a surge of pure, primal panic. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers slick with sweat. He dialed 911 first, his voice a choked whisper as he told the dispatcher what was happening. "He's digging. My neighbor. He's digging in his yard." Then he called Miller's direct line. The detective answered on the first ring, his voice sharp and awake. "What is it?" "He's outside," Thomas gasped. "Right now. He has a shovel. He's at the spot. He's gonna get rid of it, whatever it is. You have to get here now." "Patrol cars are on their way, ETA 2 minutes, Miller said, his voice a commanding calm in the storm of Thomas's fear. "We're coming. Thomas, listen to me. Do not leave your house. I repeat, do not engage him. Let us do our jobs." But Thomas was barely listening. He was on his feet, his eyes glued to the scene unfolding in the yard next door. Henderson had begun to dig, the blade of the shovel slicing into the perfect grass, turning up dark clumps of earth. The methodical, unhurried way he worked was the most terrifying thing of all. He was not a man in a panic. He was a man completing a task. The black bag sat beside the growing hole like a grim promise. Thomas felt a visceral pull toward the scene, a desperate urge to run out there, to scream, to stop him with his bare hands. It was the protective instinct of a father, a force of nature that cared nothing for police procedure or personal safety. He took a step toward his own back door, his hand reaching for the knob. He had to stop him. He had to know. The distant, approaching wail of a siren cut through the night, a sound that was both a relief and a terror. Henderson heard it too. His head snapped up, and for the first time his movements became frantic. He dropped the shovel and grabbed the heavy bag, trying to drag it back toward the house. He was too slow. 2 patrol cars screamed onto their quiet street, their headlights cutting across the lawns, pinning Henderson in their beams like a nocturnal animal caught in the open. Thomas watched from his window as the officers burst from their cars, weapons drawn, their shouted commands splitting the night. "Police! Get on the ground! Show me your hands!" The quiet, harmless old man was gone. In his place was a trapped thing, his face a mask of fury and desperation. For a moment Thomas thought he would run or fight. But then, as Detective Miller's unmarked car pulled up behind the others, Henderson seemed to collapse inward. The fight went out of him. He slowly, deliberately, lowered himself to his knees, placing his hands on top of his head. The performance was over. The flashing blue and red lights washed over Thomas's living room, painting the walls in strokes of chaos and emergency. He stood, a ghost in his own home, watching as the scene he had set in motion unfolded with methodical police precision. Detective Miller met him at the edge of his property, his face grim in the strobing light. He put a steadying hand on Thomas's arm. "Stay here," Miller commanded, his voice low but firm. "This is a crime scene now. Let us work." Thomas could only nod, his throat sealed tight with a dread that was colder and sharper than grief. He watched as they secured Henderson in the back of a patrol car. The man offered no resistance, his face a blank, placid mask once more. It was as if a switch had been flipped, the brief flash of rage extinguished, replaced by an unnerving calm. With a hastily secured warrant, the official search began. A forensic team arrived, their white vans humming under the streetlights. They erected portable floodlights, turning the suburban backyard into a stark, overlit stage. The focus of their attention was the hole Henderson had started digging. 2 technicians began to work, carefully removing the sod and soil, their movements precise and respectful, as if they were on an archaeological dig. Thomas watched every shovelful of dirt, his heart pounding with a sickening rhythm. He was expecting the worst, steeling himself for the discovery of human remains, for the final, brutal end to his hope. After what felt like an eternity, one of the technicians paused. He knelt and brushed away the soil with his hands. Then he looked up at Miller. He had found something. It was a flash of bright pink plastic. Slowly, carefully, they unearthed it. A small backpack, adorned with a faded cartoon unicorn. Lily's backpack, the one she had carried to school every day. A wave of nausea and vertigo washed over Thomas. He stumbled back, his hand flying to his mouth. This was it. The proof. She had been here. He had killed her and buried her things. But Miller's expression was not one of closure. It was tight, confused. He walked over to the hole and looked down, then spoke quietly with the technician. Why just the backpack? Felt wrong. Felt staged. A piece of bait left in a trap. He gave an order. Keep digging. The work resumed, slower now. They went deeper, past the level where the backpack had been found. Thomas's confusion warred with his horror. If not her, then what? What else was buried here? Then one of the shovels struck something hard with a dull, hollow thud. It wasn't rock. It was wood. They cleared the earth away, revealing the edges of a square shape. A door. A hatch, reinforced with iron hinges, flush with the earth. It took 2 officers with crowbars to pry it open. As the hatch lifted, a gust of foul, stale air billowed out, a smell of damp concrete, unwashed bodies, and despair. Miller and another officer, flashlights in hand, descended the crude wooden ladder that led down into the darkness. Thomas watched, his body trembling uncontrollably, the world narrowing to that black, gaping hole in his neighbor's yard. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, Miller's head reappeared in the opening. He climbed out, his face pale and etched with a horror so profound it seemed to have aged him in moments. He walked directly to Thomas. "She's not down there," Miller said, his voice a raw, strained whisper. The relief that surged through Thomas was so powerful it almost buckled his knees. But it was gone in an instant, annihilated by the look in the detective's eyes. "This wasn't a grave, Thomas," Miller continued, struggling to find the words. "It was a cell, a bunker. There's a mattress, restraints, drawings on the wall." He swallowed hard. "Not just Lily's. There are others. Different names, different styles, spanning years." The reality of Miller's words was too vast, too monstrous for Thomas to immediately comprehend. A cell, plural, drawings, years. The image of the kindly old man meticulously tending his roses shattered into a million pieces, replaced by something from the deepest, darkest corners of human depravity. "What are you saying?" Thomas whispered, though he already knew. "He wasn't just a killer," Miller said, his voice breaking with rage and disgust. "He was a keeper, a holding point. This is organized. The backpack was a decoy. It was meant to be found, to make us think she was dead, to make us stop looking." Miller's eyes met his, and in them, Thomas saw the terrible, agonizing truth. He held her here, and then he moved her. "Thomas, Lily might still be alive." The world tilted on its axis. 7 months of grieving a ghost, of mourning a memory, had been a lie. His daughter hadn't been stolen from him in a single violent act. She had been kept in a box under the ground, just 50 feet from her own bedroom. She had been living a nightmare while he had been living in a sad, quiet museum. And now she was gone again, moved like a piece of cargo, her fate unknown. As this new, more complex horror settled over him, a commotion erupted from near the patrol car. Henderson's calm had finally, irrevocably broken. As officers tried to question him, he lunged, his face contorted in a snarl of pure venom, screaming incomprehensible words of rage. He was subdued quickly, but in that moment of raw fury, Thomas saw the monster in its entirety. The search for Lily wasn't over. It had just begun. The hours that followed were a blur of fluorescent lights and the sterile smell of antiseptic. Thomas found himself in a small, windowless room at the police station, a cup of bitter, lukewarm coffee untouched in his hands. The frantic energy of the crime scene had been replaced by the slow, grinding machinery of a major investigation. Sarah was there, her face a pale, tear-streaked mask of shock. She had rushed to the station after a call from Miller, and now she sat beside Thomas, her hand gripping his, their shared grief a solid, tangible thing between them. Her earlier skepticism was a distant memory, burned away by the grotesque reality of what was hidden in Mr. Henderson's yard. Detective Miller finally entered the room, looking exhausted and grim. He pulled up a chair, his movements heavy. "Robert Henderson is talking," he began, his voice flat. "He's trying to cut a deal. He's old, he knows he'll die in prison. He's trading information for a hope of avoiding federal capital charges." "Where is she?" Sarah asked, her voice a raw whisper. "Is she okay?" Miller's gaze was direct and unflinchingly honest. "He confirms she is alive. He held her in that place for nearly 5 months. Then she was moved. 2 months ago." Thomas felt the floor drop out from beneath him again. 5 months, trapped in the dark. So close he could have heard her scream if the earth between them hadn't been so thick. The thought was a physical pain, a blade twisting in his gut. "This is bigger than we could have imagined," Miller continued, leaning forward, his voice low. "Henderson wasn't working alone. He was a cog in a machine, a very well-organized network. They target children from broken homes or situations where custody is complicated, thinking the initial search won't be as sustained. They misjudged you, Thomas. They misjudged your persistence. The detective's words were meant as a compliment, but they landed like stones. His persistence had only uncovered a deeper layer of hell. The drawings from the bunker are our best lead, Miller said, pulling out several high-resolution photographs. He spread them on the table. They were children's drawings, rendered in what looked like chalk or charcoal on the rough concrete walls. One showed a stick figure of a girl with blonde hair, Lily, standing next to a white van. On the side of the van, a symbol was crudely drawn, a jagged mountain peak with a bird flying over it. Another drawing, clearly by a different, younger child, showed a house with a red door next to a river, and a name scrawled underneath, Leo. These kids were smart, Miller said, a flicker of admiration in his tired eyes. They were resilient. They were leaving us clues. Lily was leaving you clues. Henderson admitted that he was just a temporary stop. The children were held there, acclimated, he called it, before being sold and transported to buyers. The clinical, monstrous terminology made Thomas's stomach turn. Acclimated, transported, as if they were talking about livestock, not children. Henderson has given us a name, Miller said, his focus sharpening. The man who picked Lily up, the driver of the van. He's also given us a general location, a remote, rural area in northern Idaho. That's where the hub is. The FBI is taking the lead now. They're moving on it as we speak. The confirmation of Henderson's guilt was absolute. His confession painted a picture of calculated, patient evil that defied comprehension. For years, he had been the friendly, quiet neighbor, while just beneath the surface of his perfect lawn, he had curated a private hell. He had chosen Lily because he had watched their family dissolve. He saw the divorce, the single father, and he saw an opportunity. He assumed grief and time would eventually bury the case. He had buried the backpack as insurance, a breadcrumb to lead the police to a false conclusion if they ever got too close. But he hadn't counted on a father's love. He hadn't counted on a child's cleverness. And he hadn't counted on a cheap, pink camera. The search was no longer a cold case based on whispers and theories. It was a manhunt, fueled by hard evidence and a desperate, ticking clock. The waiting was a unique form of torture, a purgatory of helplessness. Thomas and Sarah were moved to a different room at the federal building, a sterile office with a view of the city lights. An agent, a woman with a calm demeanor and kind eyes, stayed with them, providing quiet updates that said everything and nothing. They have the compound surrounded. They're preparing to make entry. The situation is fluid. Each update was a jolt to Thomas's frayed nervous system. He paced the small room like a caged animal. The image of the drawings burned into his mind. The van with the mountain and the bird. He prayed that Lily had drawn it accurately. He prayed that Henderson, in his selfish bid for self-preservation, had told the truth. He thought of Lily, imagining her ordeal with a clarity that was excruciating. The terror of the initial abduction, the confusion and horror of the underground cell, the 5 months spent in darkness, just yards from her home, and then the new terror of being moved, of being handed over to another monster. He wondered if her spirit was broken, if the bright, resilient girl he knew had been extinguished by the unrelenting darkness. The thought was unbearable. He had to believe she was still fighting. She had left him clues. She was waiting for him. Hours bled into one another. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of gray and pale pink. The city below was waking up, oblivious to the life-or-death drama playing out hundreds of miles away, and in this small, quiet room. Then the door opened. Detective Miller and the FBI agent entered. Their faces were unreadable, a carefully constructed professional calm. Thomas's heart stopped. Sarah gripped his hand so tightly her knuckles were white. "They're secured the location," the agent said, her voice even. "They encountered resistance, but it's over now," she paused. And the silence in the room was absolute, a vacuum that sucked all the air from Thomas's lungs. He braced himself for the worst news a parent could ever hear. The agent's face finally broke into a small, relieved smile. They found 3 children on the property. All alive. She looked directly at Thomas. One of them is a 10-year-old girl with blonde hair. She told the first agent on the scene that her name is Lily. The world dissolved into a smear of sound and light. A strangled cry escaped Sarah's lips. Thomas felt his legs give way, and he would have collapsed if Miller hadn't been there to catch him, guiding him into a chair. The relief was a physical force, a tidal wave that washed over him, so immense and powerful it felt like its own form of pain. It was the release of 7 months of terror, of grief, of rage, of a hope he had barely allowed himself to acknowledge. He dropped his head into his hands and wept, great, shuddering sobs that shook his entire body. She was alive. She was safe. His daughter was coming home. Justice moved swiftly after that. The network Henderson had been a part of was systematically dismantled. His testimony, combined with the evidence recovered from the Idaho compound, led to a cascade of arrests across 3 states. It was a sprawling, deeply entrenched organization that dealt in the worst kind of human currency. The men and women involved were business owners, long-haul truckers, even a retired school administrator. They were monsters hiding behind masks of absolute normality. The news reports called it one of the largest operations of its kind ever uncovered. For Thomas, it was just the machinery of the nightmare that had stolen his daughter. The reunion was not the cinematic, tearful embrace he had imagined. It happened a week later, after Lily had been medically evaluated and had begun speaking with trauma specialists. The setting was a quiet, sun-drenched room in a specialized care facility, a place designed to feel more like a home than a hospital. When Thomas and Sarah walked in, Lily was sitting at a small table, staring out the window. She was thinner, her skin pale, her eyes holding a haunted, distant look that he didn't recognize. Her blonde hair, once always in a cheerful ponytail, hung limply around her shoulders. She looked at him, and for a heart-stopping moment, there was no recognition in her gaze. It was like looking at a stranger. Miller had warned them. The agent had prepared them. Healing, they had said, is not an event. It is a process, a long and difficult road. The trauma she had endured was profound. She had survived by walling off a part of herself, by retreating to a place where the monsters couldn't reach her. Coming back would take time. Thomas's heart ached with a pain that was different from grief, but no less profound. He had his daughter back, but she was a fragile echo of the girl he had lost. He sat down at the table across from her, not wanting to crowd her. Sarah stood back, her face a portrait of love and anguish. "Hi, sweetie," Thomas said, his voice soft, afraid that any sudden sound might shatter her. "It's Dad." Lily didn't answer. She just watched him with those old, empty eyes. He didn't push. He just sat with her in the silence, letting her know he was there, that he wasn't going anywhere. He would wait for as long as it took. Days turned into weeks. Thomas practically lived at the facility, spending hours just sitting in Lily's room, sometimes talking quietly about his day, about Marmalade the cat, about the weather. Other times, he would just read, filling the silence with the steady, calm rhythm of his voice. Sarah was there every day, too. Their shared purpose had rebuilt the bridge between them, forging a new family from the ashes of the old one. They were a team, united in the singular mission of bringing Lily back from the darkness. The first breakthrough was small. One afternoon, a therapist gave Lily a box of crayons and a piece of paper. For an hour, she didn't touch them. Then, slowly, she reached out and picked up a brown crayon. She began to draw. Thomas watched, holding his breath. She drew a crude circle, then a smaller circle on top. A stick body, 2 stick arms, a head of messy, scribbled hair. It was a person. She picked up another crayon, a yellow one, and drew a smaller stick figure next to the first. She drew a line connecting their hands. Then she pushed the paper across the table toward him. Thomas looked down at the drawing. 2 stick figures, one large and one small, holding hands against a blank white void. He looked up at Lily. Her eyes were fixed on him, and in their depths, for the first time since her return, he saw a flicker, a tiny, fragile spark of the girl he remembered. It wasn't a smile. It wasn't a word. But it was a connection. It was a beginning. He felt tears well in his eyes, but these were not tears of grief or horror. They were tears of a deep, aching, and ferocious hope. The path ahead of them was long, and he knew the shadows of that cellar and that compound would follow them for the rest of their lives. The trauma was a scar that would never fully fade, but scars were proof of survival. He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers, his fingers gently covering the small hand that had drawn the picture. She didn't pull away. He looked at the drawing again, at the two simple figures bound together. He had found his daughter in the darkness, and now, together, they would have to learn how to walk back into the light. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long, long time he could see the dawn.